Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Employment Committee. I'm Councillor Stuart Brown, Chair of the Committee. I would like to draw your attention to the following housekeeping and safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street, past the University's Park building. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of the meeting. Today's meeting will be live streamed and the camera will zoom in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones, therefore can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you have finished speaking. Members of the public are permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those, stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast the meeting. So before we go any further, let's do introductions. If we'd like to start on my right, please.
Councillor Simon Bowes, Conservative Group.
Councillor Darren Sanders, Liberal Democrat Group.
Councillor Cal Corkery, Portsmouth Community Independent Group.
Dave Ashmore, one of the Fratton councillors and part of the Lib Dem Group.
Karen Martin, Democratic Services.
Natasha Edmonds, Director of Corporate Services.
Jeremy Underdown, Head of Facilities.
Rochelle Williams, Assistant Director of HR.
Karen Everett, HR Business Partner.
Natalie Brommer-Pearl, Chief Executive.
Lovely, thank you all very much, and you're all very welcome. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. We have received apologies from Councillor Charlotte Gerarda, as she is currently on maternity leave. I believe Councillor Shah will be attending as a standing deputy, but he may not be here for the first part of the meeting as he's currently journeying back from London. So depending on transport, will arrive at some point. Item 2, any declarations of interest from members? I'm seeing no one indicating. Thank you very much. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of September 2023. I do have one slight amendment. The printed version of the minutes show Councillor Bowes as being present, whereas I believe Councillor Bowes, you weren't able to join us last time. Interestingly, the online version of the minutes actually shows the correct attendance, as that's drawn from the attendance records rather than what was typed up. But Karen, if we can just amend the typed version to reflect that. Members, are there any other corrections to the minutes or matters arising that you'd like to bring up today? No? Lovely. In which case, are we all happy to approve those as a correct record of the last meeting? Fantastic. This brings us on to item 4, Appointments Subcommittee, Director Recruitment. I'd like to invite Natalie Brommer-Pearl, Chief Executive, Portsmouth City Council, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. The purpose of this report, I think, is self-explanatory. It says it in the report. The previous post holder left earlier this year. The report is proposing that we can progress with the appointment and the recruitment process to get that going, to make a new appointment, and just to bring to committee's attention the change of the name in the post. Previously it was Director of Regeneration, and the proposal is to change that to Director of Economy, Planning and Transport. And I think that's all there is to say on it. Thank you.
Before we move on to any questions or comments from members, what I would like to say is, in order to not get us caught up with throwing names around the place all day today, obviously we will be nominating the membership. What I would like to ask the committee's approval for is to delegate the nomination of membership to myself and to Natalie. My intention is to send out a call to all members of full council for expressions of interest in the post. Now, an expression of interest would not guarantee that they get on the committee, but before we even start appointing people, we would like to know who's actually interested in serving. Do members have any objections or comments on that proposal?
Traditionally, where we've done this before, it's been for group leaders to nominate members of their groups to go forward. I apologise for my throat. If group leaders themselves can't sit on it. So I would prefer, rather than something going out from yourself, Chair, that it was actually to come from nominations from within each group by the group leader.
I'm more than happy to contact group leaders and ask for them to ask their groups if that's the preferred method. Okay, lovely. In which case, do any members have questions or comments for Natalie on the report? Councillor Sanders.
It's not so much about the report, it's just about what we do going forwards from here, if we have any other director posts that are put forwards. I understand traditionally this has come through this committee in order to appoint a subcommittee, but that just seems increasingly to be a rubber stamping exercise. So I'm not quite sure whether there's some way in which we could ask, say, governance and audit, for instance, to have a look and see whether the process could be streamlined at all. I don't want to remove the democratic aspect of it, not least involving all groups, but it seems to me if the process can be streamlined, that would be lovely.
Yes, and certainly in our discussions leading up to this, we have found the clunkiness of the current system a little bit frustrating. So I think there are already plans afoot for potential constitutional amendments, which will obviously include governance and audit to have oversight of them. So just to try and streamline it a bit moving forward. Okay, if there are... Councillor Bosher.
No, I wouldn't fundamentally disagree with what Darren is suggesting, but the Employment Committee is appointing a subcommittee of the Employment Committee. So therefore it is down to the Employment Committee to make that, I sound a little bit like Yes Minister here. It's down to the Employment Committee to carry out those approvals in the same way constitutionally that the Scrutiny Management Committee does exactly the same thing with its own subcommittees in that respect. So I hear what you're saying, Darren, but you put this something like this through governance and audit, unless they're going to recommend changes, which is a completely separate thing altogether, the whole thing is within the gift of this committee because it's an employment issue that we're talking about.
Yeah, I don't think we were talking about having the governance committee take over the process, just looking at streamlining
make
it.
recommendations, because that would have to go through the constitution side of it.
Yeah. Councillor Sanders.
Sorry, just for clarity, Simon, that's pretty much what I was after. It's just the constitutional propriety. GASC should not take over anything that we do. It's just around the constitutional propriety, just to see if it can be streamlined. If it can't, it can't. But there we go.
Any further questions or comments on the substance of the report? In which case, are all members agreed on the recommendations as mildly amended through our discussion just now? Councillor Bosher.
Just on the makeup of the committee, how many subcommittee members are we actually looking for? And there's a reference to diversity there, but I would imagine we're also looking about political diversity as well, so that we get an even spread. But it would be useful to know.
That's a good point. We probably
how
should
many
decide
we're
on
actually
terms of
looking
reference
for.
on that.
Because certainly when we were going through the chief executive's appointment, we started out with a subcommittee of about 18 members, which seemed a little bit on the ridiculous side before we pared it all down a bit. Because I wouldn't like to be sat on the other side of the table from 18 people carrying out the Spanish Inquisition.
I think certainly a committee of 5 is more than adequate, unless members have any other suggestions for the size of the committee. Is everybody happy with aiming for a committee of 5? And obviously, in terms of gender and ethnic background, we will do our best to achieve diversity, but it does depend on who the group leaders are able to talk into putting the names forward from their own individual groups. Okay, so we're settled with Councillor Corkery. In which case, members, are we happy to agree the mildly amended recommendations for item 4?
I was being confused myself. I have got a question on this report, but not on the size of the subcommittee.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead.
Just, I guess, in terms of pay, obviously the pay policy statement, which goes through this committee and then through full council, has a published salary range for directors. Understand historically there's been kind of deviation from that. I just wondered if there's an expectation that will be the case this time, and if so, what the process is for approving that and any kind of involvement that members may have within that.
Sure. I mean, to my knowledge, we are looking to do a like-for-like replacement of the previous post, although if, Natalie or Natasha, if you have any further information on the proposed salary that differs from that.
No, it's as you say, Chair, it is a like-for-like replacement, which reflects the current grade and market conditions.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Corkery?
Yeah, it does. I guess just for transparency, for anyone that may be watching it, that what we're saying then is that it will be appointment on a kind of higher salary than what is published within the pay policy statement for director grade. So I guess that's the point I just wanted to make and bring into the public realm. I guess just a follow-up question in terms of market conditions, which have been referenced. Obviously, we know there's kind of pay inflation across the board. If we're looking to appoint to the previous salary range, is that going to be an issue, or are we kind of happy that we'll be able to get someone suitable for the post within that pay scale?
Natasha?
We have taken advice on that, and we are confident that we will be able to appoint within that range.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions, comments, anything to do with the report, or are we now happy to move on to approving those recommendations? Okay. Anyone against the recommendations? I see none. They are approved. Thank you. Let's move on then to item 5, Annual Health and Safety Report. I'd like to ask Jeremy Underdown, Head of Facilities, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I am bringing to you what would normally be the annual health and safety report for the preceding reporting period, which in this case was April 2022 to March 2023. The first thing to note, I suppose, is that this is being listed as an interim annual report, because I think there's some sensibleness in changing when the actual physical report comes to the committee. Essentially, it's very difficult to report on something that's happened effectively 6 months ago and then ask the committee to agree an action plan for a year that's in approximately 6 months' time. So it seems to be in the wrong time. So I think it would be sensible to come back to committee in March and bring the annual report for the reporting period April 23 to March 24, and at that point present the action plan for the year going forward. That being said, there are a number of points to note in this particular report. I suppose the top of the list is to recognise a recent change in structure to the health and safety team and its reporting lines. The previous health and safety manager left the organisation at the end of September. And we've taken the opportunity to place health and safety within the facilities management service. There's some obvious synergies there, in the sense that we effectively have the kind of theoretical side of building management with the health and safety team, and then the operational side of the facilities management team. So some synergy in placing those two teams together. The other detail within this interim report at the moment is the standard facts and figures that tend to be contained in previous reports. Training figures, instances of accidents, riddle reports, etc., which all present as being within kind of standard norms and expectations and within tolerance. The only other thing really to highlight is that the report does hint at what I think the focus should be in the next reporting year, in terms to reflect on some of the work that the team are doing at the moment and where we should be looking going forward. So particularly as an opportunity to digitise our processes and make them much more user-friendly for the entire organisation. In turn, that will provide us with the opportunity to better analyse data and report on trends, and obviously target our approach to where it needs to be across the organisation. I think there is a need to focus on reasserting roles and responsibilities across the organisation. Everybody has a role to play within health and safety, from chief exec through the hierarchy down to officers on the ground, and I think there's a real need to focus back on everybody's roles and responsibilities and what managers should be doing. And of course, I think there's a real need to enable and strengthen a better audit programme across the organisation, which some of the work around digitisation and reasserting roles and responsibilities will allow us to do in the next year. That's my report in a nutshell.
Lovely, thank you very much. And I think your proposed timetabling changes for the report seem eminently sensible. Members, any questions? Councillor Bowsher.
Yes, I've got a couple, perhaps just for clarification. Point 9, visits from enforcing authorities. To our knowledge, there were no visits by enforcing authorities during the reporting period. Do they not tell us if they have been in and found nothing, or do we just never know? Is it like some sort of mystery shopper type arrangement?
So I suppose there's a bit of wording there really, in the sense that no visits from the enforcing authority, so the HSE, have been reported to the health and safety team. We don't know potentially at times when the HSE will visit or respond to reports. Obviously the kind of organisation is quite vast, and we have nobody has reported to the health and safety team that they've had any visits from the health and safety executive.
So is the assumption I can draw from that then is there could have been visits, but we've got a clean bill of health and there's been nothing for them to necessarily report.
Yes.
So it's probably a good news statement. It's just the way it's worded.
Yes, agreed, yeah.
Okay. The other one, and perhaps a bit of clarification around it, is 6.2. Now, I know that asbestos and Legionella are very specialist areas, but fire and fire training is and that's my background anyway, is the responsibility of everyone. The statement there seems to suggest that there's some sort of liaison meetings that happen between senior staff and Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue, as it says there. It'd be interesting to know what happens with regards to the wider workforce and how that is actually brought into play, because certainly with regards to things like fire marshals, routes of escape, all of those sorts of things that go as part and parcel of it, what sort of training is involved to make sure that it's everybody that has a responsibility when it comes to fire safety and not just a select few that is a reporting mechanism. I don't doubt that probably happens, but it would be nice to know just a little bit more about how that works and how it's carried out.
That's absolutely fine. I mean, I can provide some more detail around that when I bring another report back in March.
Councillor Corkery.
Thank you. With regards to section 7 on training, I know there's a reference to compliance levels being monitored by the Health and Safety Forum with direct follow-up with departments. I just wondered if you could tell us, I appreciate you might not have the exact figures to hand, but are there any issues with regards to compliance that we should be aware of? And I guess to follow up that with a suggestion that it might be useful in future for us to know the compliance levels, just as a matter of course for this committee, so that we can kind of monitor that on an ongoing basis. So take one, for example, fire safety. Obviously, if that's 99% plus, great, but if it's 50%, then there's clearly an issue, and that's maybe something that'd be useful for this committee to know about and have some input into.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we're not sat here thinking that we do have any particular issues with compliance around the training of information, but again, I'm happy to take that back, and when I come back in March to obviously expand on those issues a little bit more.
Interesting what you mean by compliance, because to me that is the number of personnel that have gone through those training programs over the course of the last year. And, you know, you can go through the training, but you've got to do it in your everyday life. And so something like display screen equipment, you'll go through all manner of bits and pieces, glasses and everything else like that. but compliance is about what you go and do the day after you've taken the course, in my view. So I sort of see those figures as the number of employees that have been through those training programs. What I would be interested in is how often those training programs are carried out for the relevant staff. Certainly in the roles that I do, I'm doing some of these courses quarterly, particularly with some of the sites that I have to go onto in London and stuff like that. And things that are always important, certainly in the sort of industry I work in, are things like manual handling and stuff like that, to avoid any specific injuries. And if we're setting people through it so they do it once when they arrive in the company and then they're not doing it again, then I would question whether that is adequate. If they're doing it annually, then I would think that probably is. So it'd be interesting to know what the background of these courses are and how often employees actually have to take them, because most of these, to me, are probably annual.
So if I could just provide a bit more clarification on that for you. The training that is listed, well, the training that we have for health and safety is quite extensive. So some of that will be training that you have to do as part of induction. Then there will be other elements that you have to do annually. And then depending on your role, there will then be additional mandatory training like the manual handling. So we have manual handling for our staff, for example, that work with people. We also then, depending on your role, and I think this is the point that Jeremy was making around greater emphasis on roles and responsibilities, there will be different elements of health and safety training. For example, if you're responsible for a building, around things like fire regulations, asbestos, Legionella, etc. So we are building a matrix that will give far greater clarity for individuals on the responsibilities and what is mandatory training for health and safety relative to the role that you fulfil, because it will differ given the diversity of roles that we have in the organisation. In terms of reporting, we're in the process of replacing our learning management system. So we do typically provide the committee with data on compliance with all of these different training courses. But whilst we're changing the learning management system, it's a manual process to gather all of that information, and it's very resource intensive. But we anticipate that by the time we come back to report to you, we should have got that new system in place, which will make all of that reporting much more straightforward to provide to you.
And I assume that when we're talking about compliance, we're talking about compliance with the requirements to undergo training and not, as Councillor Bosher was intimating, compliance with what you're actually being trained to do.
So some elements of the training are, so it's compliance with completing the training, but then the training also tests your learning so that you then are familiar with exactly what you need to do. And we also do run regular campaigns around, for example, things like the display screen equipment. And we do have targeted interventions when we do identify particular issues that we need to address.
Members, any other questions? I've got one very quick one. Assuming that 22-23 wasn't the first year that we started using hazardous substances, is there any particular reason there was no cost training in previous years?
I think it's just that the data that's presented in this table is reflective of new classroom-based courses following COVID. So it's difficult to compare those to previous years, hence the lack of data from following years. But you're right, we have been using hazardous substances for a lot longer.
Thank you. Councillor Bosher.
Sorry, I've got one more, Stuart. Some of these are obviously very specialist courses like Legionella, and you could argue the cost training at the same time as well. When it comes to external contractors, do they have to go through an induction where they are trained on our courses, if you like, or a course, or do we sort of take it as read that somebody that has refrigeration and air conditioning written on the side of their van has actually gone through that training themselves?
So, I expect my colleague Richard will be able to jump in and help me on this one, but the majority of our external contractors, obviously their contractual position puts the responsibility on them to ensure that adequate training and adequate checks have been provided for all those various things. I mean, obviously there's a risk to PCC, but the liability sits with the contractors.
Sorry, Stuart. So we are reliant on the fact that when external contractors come into any of our premises, that we are assuming that their staff have been through the relevant training, as opposed to an induction about what is specific to our sites. That is a pretty unusual way of actually doing it, I have to say.
If somebody's coming into a specific building to undertake some work, then there are processes to check that they have the right insurances, the right training, etc. Obviously, there's a broader piece at play with large construction contracts where obviously there's a need for those individuals to have training, and part of the contract management would be to ensure that operatives are trained to the extent that they need to be and compliant with all of their various qualifications.
Members, any further questions on this report? No? This report is for noting, so is everyone happy that we note the contents of the report? Lovely, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 6, Workforce Profile 2022. I'd like to invite Natasha Redmond, Director of Corporate Services, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the third year that we've provided a workforce profile. The purpose is to give you an idea of what the profile of the workforce looks like against a number of characteristics. It helps to inform how we target some of our interventions, both from an equalities point of view, but also from a strategic workforce point of view, to make sure that we've got the best workforce we can to deliver for our residents. So highlights from the report are our gender profile has remained largely consistent with previous years, as has our ethnicity profile. What is of significance is that our turnover has increased quite significantly. And interestingly, so has our proportion of staff who work full-time. And I think those are both reflective of the current economic climate that we are working in. Particularly the turnover is a challenge for us, but we are not alone in that, with other employers across the country, which does make it challenging for us. And obviously we are focusing all of our activities going forward on how we make Portsmouth a great place to work, how we remove barriers to recruitment. We are working on our equality strategy and consulting on that, so that itself as well will focus on areas that we can improve against some of our protected characteristics in our workforce. The other thing interesting to note is that the staff, the proportion of staff that live within the city boundary is back up to pre-pandemic levels. So members will have noted in the last report for the previous year that there was an increase in staff working in far-flung places, but it seems to be going back to a more local model. And those are the highlights, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Members, any questions? Councillor Sanders.
Thanks, Stuart. The turnover is the most worrying thing of all. Are there any particular areas where turnover is higher than others, or is it just across the board?
Well, we've got traditionally hard to recruit areas such as children's social care and planning, and these are well-known areas across the country where there are skills shortages. We are starting to see that spread to a much wider range of roles across the council. So we're now looking at challenges in recruiting communications specialists, lawyers, finance professionals, engineering, transport. It's probably now increasing to all of the areas that we that we provide a workforce in and services in. It's a difficult market.
Okay, thank you for that, Natasha. Is there anything that we as an authority can do to try and reverse this? And the answer is probably yes. So what sort of things are being looked at to try and reverse this?
Well, obviously, it's a great place to work. So we're majoring on that. But the biggest challenge that we've got is around pay. If I'm honest, our pay rates are not competitive with the local market or with other local authorities. So we are seeing challenges. We are seeing people move for higher pay, and we're struggling to recruit because our pay isn't competitive with the same or similar level of jobs that staff can get with other employers.
Just jumping in on that, is there any evidence that employee perk packages actually have any effect in offsetting the slightly lower wages, or are they just something nice to have?
They do make a difference, but I think it's a slightly more complex issue, and the drivers for employee engagement vary significantly across the different professional groups that we employ. There's also a focus on a values mix, as well as an age profile. So we find that younger generations are more likely to go to an organisation where there's a match of values rather than a higher rate of pay. And things like a commitment to climate change and social value. But that's a particular generation. You have different factors that will drive the motivation to work somewhere, depending on the different professions as well. So it's quite a complex picture, but benefits packages have their place. Of course they do, but it's the total package. It's the ethos of the organisation, and it's also about how we market ourselves out there to compete with other employers. Local government generally is not a sector that is well known when trying to recruit. So if you say go and work at Google, Microsoft, Amazon, places like that, they're well known brands. If you go and work for the council, it's not quite as sexy. And we don't quite have the reputation of some of those other brands. So we need to do work on our employer brand, which is work that's in train as well.
Councillor Bosher.
I hope you are not suggesting the return of the staff drinking club anytime soon. That was more than enough problems. Is that why, Natasha, that when you actually look at the statistics that you've got here, that we are underrepresented with those in the youngest group ages of 16 to 24, because the council isn't seen as a sexy place to work, so to speak, if that's the right phraseology. I'd be interested to know where we actually advertise the jobs, because I see most of the Portsmouth City Council advertised jobs on LinkedIn, because that's where I have my work profile. Do we actually advertise? It'd be nice to understand how we go about it and where we go about it, because that's all I ever see. It's on LinkedIn, and with the best one in the world, LinkedIn is a certain culture and a certain sort of business profile, if I'm honest, and it's probably not where 16 to 24-year-olds would be, because it's not called TikTok or Instagram, if I'm honest, is it?
Is that an offer to come live on TikTok? We'll take you up on that. So in terms of where we advertise our jobs, obviously we've got our own advertising platform, which gets a huge number of hits. We actually use it as a commercial platform. People pay to use our own website to advertise jobs, but we do have job boards which are picked up by external things like Indeed. So they take all of our jobs and advertise those for them on their platforms. Depending on where we are, we will use social media, depending on the type of job that it is and how we profile it. If we need to, we use external agents. But we also do have links with our local universities, or the universities that specialise in the areas that we're trying to recruit to, depending on the job role and the job type. So we have those relationships. I think we spoke at a recent directors board, earlier this year, around the directors and the ADs forging those links with the universities where they don't already exist, and what we can do, because we are we offer fabulous placements. So people love to come to the City Council to undertake their placement from university, but we've got that gap between them then staying on in our job roles after that placement. So we provide them with all the skills and the support that they need to get their qualification. So it's just bridging that gap as to how we can then retain them. So some of the areas that we're looking at are to increase our apprenticeship offer. Obviously, we've got the degree apprenticeship, and create career pathways across our job roles as well, so that we're bringing people in at an earlier stage in their career, whether that's a career transition or entry into the career, and keep them. And obviously T-levels are one of those ways that we could do, depending on where the government go with T-levels. They may or may not be getting rid of them, so we're just watching that space at the moment, but that would offer us an even younger cohort, an early cohort to engage with. But in terms of recruitment, we cover all the major platforms out there. What we will be looking at the next phase, because we're also looking to replace our current recruitment system, is how we proactively seek and job hunt. We used to have access to things like CV Library, where we can do searches in the same way as the recruitment agencies can, but whilst we've been implementing our existing system, we haven't been able to do that, so that will be on the radar for next year as well, funds permitting.
Thank you, Rochelle. Councillor Boyce, anything further on that? Okay. Let's go to Councillor Sanders first then.
That's right. I mean, pending what Simon was saying, I think that, I mean, I'm happy to obviously note the contents of this report, note the profile, but I think in terms of turnover, it'd be very useful to have some sort of update as we go forwards on what is being done and what can be done to do that. Now, I appreciate that that may lead to issues of commercial sensitivity, like you can't actually tell people what extra things you're offering. So there may be ways around that, I'm sure. But certainly it would be good for members, if members are okay, just to have an update on the sort of things that are going on, and also the sort of comparative things that are going on in similar authorities, such as Southampton and Hampshire and the island. I think that would be useful, but it may be that some of the answers to those questions can never be made public, because clearly you don't want to tell new people coming in, oh, by the way, we're giving you a roller, which could be fun. But I think that sort of stuff would be useful going forward, because I don't think we can let this go. I think it's too important.
Natasha, would it be possible to get a report to the March meeting?
Yes, of course.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Bosher.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Darren's saying. The other one I'm looking at is we are overrepresented in the 45 to 64 age group. Now, as much as I'd like to think that the majority are 45, I suspect that's probably not necessarily the case. Now, what you said around difficult to retain and recruit and wages and whatever like that, are we potentially facing an issue with a significant number of people close to retirement, you're nodding at me already, retirement age, which is going to exacerbate that recruitment and retention programme?
Yes, we are, and we are tracking that to particular services as well. I have one in my own in IT. I'm going to lose some of my very highly skilled team in the next 5 years unless I can convince them to stay on. I think finance have a particular challenge in that area as well. Those are just a couple off the top of my head. Although the Chief Exec has already tasked us with putting a greater focus on succession planning, we need to really up our game on looking at how we are bringing people through their careers and looking at that succession, because you're right, it's increasingly urgent as an issue to address.
Yeah, you said the phrase I was going to use, succession planning, and how we're going to do that. Otherwise, you could end up with a bit of an oops very quickly and then a big hole somewhere. It would be, I'm not looking for war and peace, Stuart, but it would be interesting to understand how we're going about that to make sure that we don't suddenly use I call them experienced staff quickly and then find that we haven't got any succession planning in place. So something around that would be useful with the workforce profile report as well.
So if I could maybe in March bring back a more detailed analysis around both the turnover, but also the age profile and then the succession plans, but also a better idea of where we've got those particular risks. Would that, in the March meeting, would that report be helpful? Yeah.
And in particular, anything we're doing to avoid a skills vacuum. Thank you very much. Members, any further questions on the report? Are we happy to note? Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Our final item on the agenda, item 7, real living wage updates, and again it's over to Natasha.
Thank you. So this report was requested by full council recently by way of an update to the position on real living wage and real living wage accreditation. Since full council, the government have announced that national living wage is being set at £11.44, which is significantly higher than had been previously predicted. And we obviously also know now that the real living wage, what the real living wage rate will be at £12. So in terms of accreditation and the process to go through to achieve that, nothing much has changed, but you will, I'm sure, have worked out that what has changed is the cost profile that we would be subject to if we were to pursue accreditation. I think the data is set out in the report, so I'll pause for questions.
Thank you very much. And before we move on to questions, obviously, members, we're being asked by full council to consider whether we want to re-establish a working group. We don't necessarily need to if we don't think it's the best thing to do. And in many respects, this committee is the working group on it, as we have a standing request in with Natasha that should there be any movement, she would inform us as soon as that's applicable. So I'll leave that open to members for discussion. Councillor Bosher.
We had a report on this come to us in November 2022 after a significant piece of work. I guess my question is, other than the figures, so what the costs are and what the actual figures are for the living wage, real living wage, has anything else actually changed from the body of that report other than the figures?
The short answer is no. I mean, Richard can obviously provide a bit more context in terms of ongoing engagement with our suppliers, but the process to secure accreditation hasn't changed. I suppose what has changed is we identified in the previous reports that the biggest impact would be on social care and the social care market. That provider market has seen some significant challenge. I believe we've seen some reductions in the number of providers in the marketplace. So it's an increasingly challenging area to be operating in.
I understand that. The only reason I'm asking is because there is a a political aspect to this, in so much that people are going to want to know how much it costs when they go into the rounds of budget punch-ups in February, and whether there was a short way of doing it to say, is it reasonable to review the November 2022 report and update it with the current figures as they stand as of today? Because I don't think, from what you're saying, the body of the text is largely going to change, and I wouldn't want to send officers off on some expensive exercise to essentially come up with exactly the same reports, but just with different figures in it. And if we can agree to go down that particular route, Chairman, I think that will probably satisfy what we're seeking to do in the Employment Committee, and will probably satisfy the political groupings from a point of view of shaping what they're planning to do from a budget point of view. I don't know whether others feel similar on that.
Yes, I know I'm certainly not minded to ask officers, members and trade unionists to essentially form a talking shop with no different outcomes from last year. It's just, in my opinion, a waste of time. Councillor Sanders.
Sorry, Chairman, I was going to say, I don't think we can sit here as a committee and say, no, we've considered it and we're not going to do it, because I don't think that is the mood music from full council.
Sure. But yes, a review of the last year's report and updating with the figures would certainly be acceptable to me. Councillor Sanders?
Yes, I mean, I would support that. I think that anybody who signs up to such a group is effectively signing up to a £4 million cuts package. I don't think any of us want to sign up to a £4 million cuts package. Thank you very much. I would suggest that actually the position is slightly worse than Natasha is outlining, not just the costs, but also bear in mind that in the past couple of years, the pay rise for local government staff has been related to the national living wage, because the employers and most of the unions have accepted there needs to be what's called headroom. And that headroom and the rise in the national living wage is bigger in April 2024 than it was in April 2023. So on that logic, staff are facing a higher pay rise than the £1,925 that all staff got or will get on the 29th of December, when it will come in. Now that actually, for me, that makes the position worse in terms of this. We could talk about the failures of social care and how nobody's actually sorted it out until the cows come home. But actually the position I feel is slightly worse. And I'm certainly reluctant to get people to sign up to what is effectively a £4 million plus cuts package, because that's not right. If anybody's got any bright ideas, that's lovely. But the amount of money, I think, is just, it's gone from bad to prohibitive, when actually it's something we all want to do if the money's there. And that's where I think the political consensus lies. The question is how we get there.
And actually, Natasha, do we have any idea on the impacts? I know we said the 3.6 million was the cost of implementing just the wage increases, with a ballpark round up to 4 million for implementation costs. Does this recent news about the change in rates impact those figures? I'm assuming upward, if it is.
Well, I wouldn't want to speak out of turn. I don't have finance colleagues here, but I think the context is we've got adult social care already forecasting a significant overspend. We've got the cost you've just outlined to achieve national living wage, and then real living wage on top of that. So, yeah, much in excess of 4 million.
So the 4 million that we would have had to find is now more. 4 plus X million.
Chairman, the only other point I'm going to make, I mean, I was looking for a fast-track route to actually do this. I'm also minded in the fact that if you take the political aspect and the budget, which is February time, there's going to need that report to come back, I would suggest, in January, and obviously come through an employment committee meeting, so that everybody that goes into that budget meeting in February has the official document, so we don't get any posturing in the chamber because we don't have that information available at that time. And yes, I am probably being a little bit political there, but I think everybody needs to go into that budget meeting with clarity, with a report that shows the full implications of doing this.
And our next employment committee meeting is scheduled for the 25th of January. Natasha, is that a realistic timescale to get the updated reports through to the committee?
I think so, yes. I mean, it's just a case of putting the figures together, and I can speak to finance colleagues to do that, and then we can come back. Well, not mine, finance colleagues. Delegate.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Members, any further questions or comments on this particular issue? Councillor Sanders?
It's a very small comment. There are two budgets that are affected by this. The general fund obviously has got all the horrible numbers because it's got adult social care. But I will ask people in the housing team to oversee the housing revenue account to see whether it's possible, whether they can get what I'm told is the £4.50 or £2,000 or whatever it is, to try and make sure that all the housing revenue account contractors are paid the real living wage, because it doesn't have the nightmare that is adult social care. Whether I get there or not, I've got no clue. But I will certainly endeavour to give it a go, because I think we can, in a way we can't do it for adult social care.
Councillor Corkery, Councillor Ashmore, would either of you like to comment on this issue? No? In which case, I think what we're determining then is that rather than re-establishing a full working group, we're asking for an updated version of the last working group's report to take into account the most recent financial information, to come back to Employment Committee for the January meeting so that it's ready for all groups to have access to ahead of the Budget Full Council in February. Members, are we all agreed on that resolution? Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Unless there's any further business, I'm seeing none. That brings this meeting of the Employment Committee to a close. The time is 17:50.